What is global sociology? This is a good question, and I'm glad you're taking this class with me. I want to describe global sociology in this video and in this course in two ways, thinking about economic globalization and thinking about cultural globalization. And the trick is they can't really be separated. They're really inextricable. Is globalization a new thing? No. And yes, I know. Karl Marx, a founding thinker of sociology, argued in 1848 that capitalism and the growth of industry in terms of shipping and the production of goods and transporting it all over the world, that was part of globalization. And obviously, a part of globalization is also the colonial conquest from Europe, the basically stealing of Africans from Africa and bringing them over to the United States in the Middle Passage. All of these things are part of globalization historically. But globalization scholars of today, like George Ritzer, Robin Rodriguez, these sociologists argue that in the late 20th century, that globalization had a marked difference in terms of the economic globalization of things like McDonald's or the rise of the multinational corporations, especially after World War II, when some of the most powerful countries in the world really divvied up the rest of the world so that they could keep peace and also start to maintain an economic process among sort of poorer countries and richer countries. But the truth of the matter is, economic globalization, capitalism, global capitalism cannot ever be separated or unlinked from the social world that it's embedded in. Economic globalization and the world systems in terms of economy is enmeshed, embedded in the political, in the social, in the cultural, in the experiential dimensions of our world. Scholars and people alike also wonder if globalization is making everything the same. What sociologists call cultural homogenization is at the top of everyone's mind. Some critics of globalization say that it's sort of coming from the West and really dominating all kinds of different cultures all over the world, that globalization is a sort of process of westernization, right? And some folks like John Tomlinson call it cultural imperialism. One way to think about cultural imperialism or cultural globalization is through the reality and the metaphor of McDonald's. McDonald's is a multinational corporation that has locations everywhere. But to some folks not from the West, having a McDonald's come into their neighborhood feels like a domineering process from the West, where the ideas and the food, the values of the West is coming and encroaching on their land, encroaching on their culture, encroaching on their neighborhood. Cultural globalization is this idea that critics say that many things that are coming from the West culturally are coming to control ideas, information, values that are not necessarily from non-Western countries. But scholars also argue that culture isn't a one-way avenue, and cultural globalization isn't just a one-way street. Many scholars assert that different locations, peoples, and cultures assert their identity and hold on to their local cultural richness while interacting with globalizing processes and global corporations like McDonald's. In this way, cultural globalization and the studies around it really balance the ideas around what is coming from the West and what are people pushing back and negotiating with. In this class, we'll also be thinking about the great debate of, is globalization harmful, both economically, culturally, and all of different kinds of dimensions? Does globalization exacerbate inequalities around racial wealth gap or climate change and the environment? Is globalization and the cultural flows between countries making everyone the same? Are cultures in trouble of losing their own specificity and cultural richness? Or what scholars called deterritorialization, are cultures not being anchored to a specific place anymore, given that we can view culture, consume culture from right here where we sit at home? In this class, we'll be taking up these debates and we'll be asking questions and making informed perspectives and analysis on the questions of what are the consequences of globalization? How do we make sense of the complexities, the importances, the dangers of an increasingly globalizing world? How do we balance its hindrances and its advances? In your flip grid this week, I'd like for you to post or talk about an example of economic or cultural globalization that you might know about. Bring it to the class and talk a little bit about why you think that pertains to global sociology. Until next time.